Hey, so what are the questions today, Adrian?
Yes, so I had some questions prepared, but the goal is to also take questions from the audience, and we'll start with some of them that were already addressed here in the chat. Thanks, Mark, for the great introduction and the presentation. Seems that it was inspiring, and we have quite a number of questions from our viewers. So Vladan is saying, I have a question. Do you think that NoSQL database can be used as a sole and primary storage?
Yes, we are actually seeing a number of customers who are using our MongoDB, and I know that Cassandra and Couchbase are sometimes used as full general purpose databases. We have a bunch of customers all the way from Amadeus, Goldman Sachs, an awful lot of people who are using MongoDB for primary databases. I got to tell you, though, a lot of people are also still using relational databases.
And another question is there anything you can think of where an SQL would be a better choice?
Yeah, I would say that if your data is strictly rows and columns, and if you just have, very set data, then it works fine. The other place where it's a good choice is if you're working with legacy third-party applications that just want to call in SQL. And there's no doubt about it that there's a real use case for relational in some cases.
Alex is asking, related to what you said earlier, that batching is no longer a viable option, and he would like to understand a bit more of why is that.
So what we're seeing out there, and we saw it at Grab, and Adrian, you probably remember this, is that the analysts were being asked to produce data. They'd roll out our software, and then they'd be asked to tell how the software was going in like an hour. And it just wasn't working. And so we had parts of our data lake which were a couple days behind, and that just didn't work anymore. And so what we're seeing with things like Kafka and companies like Rockset is this ability to process data almost instantly and get answers. And we actually think that's where people are going to be moving.
Thank you for that. A question from Roman. What tool platform would you recommend to use for storing, managing your data while prototyping your app or idea?
Oh, well, I'm certainly going to say MongoDB and MongoDB Compass and things like that. At the same time, there's a lot of different tool sets out there. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, I didn't know all the tool sets. And I told them they were full of it. And then they gave me a list of like 20 tool sets without me even knowing it. So I don't really know. I think it's an area of innovation that is just, it's amazing.
And the second question, regarding the slides, I think the organizers will share the recordings online after the event, so you can access them there. But I'm encouraging everyone watching to ask more questions in the chat. This is a unique opportunity to have Mark, who's an very experienced leader, to answer your questions. But in the meantime, drilling back a bit on what was the previous question related for a company, let's say a startup, or someone having an idea wanting to prototype something, and you were saying something in the presentation that said assume scale from the start. And I wanted to clarify what start are you talking about? Because on one side, we're encouraging entrepreneurs to, be scrappy, launch something, see if you have, a problem to solution fit. And then once you get to like product to market fit, then we'll talk about money from like a product and business perspective. From a data complexity perspective, where do you think that is the kind of like the sweet spot where companies should say, okay, like we need to really discuss how we're going to store, manage, and query the data that we're collecting, because we are at that point now?
So the scale thing is two pieces. Number one, stand up load balancer, stand up standard application infrastructure, even in your POCs. Second, I see people who build apps and they just depend on local SSDs or something for the first version of their app. And they build it, and then all of a sudden they get to the point where they have more data than fits on local SSDs, or they need reliability that local SSDs don't provide, and all of a sudden their app doesn't work. So what I encourage people to do is build applications which kind of have almost a POC of the full storage and scalability from the beginning. Otherwise, the success of your app, when people love it and they say, hey, let's roll this thing out, all of a sudden you're like, whoa, before I roll it out, it's going to take me 2 months to re-architect it. And it just doesn't work. And, frankly, the beautiful thing about this is if you just spend 15 to 20 minutes setting up things right the first time, you don't have to go through a lot of this stuff.
That's very correct, and I want to kind of like expand the discussion a bit, in the sense that we are having massive amounts of data that are available, and we're making a lot of progress with optimal storing and optimal querying capabilities. But when we look back at technologies like 5 years ago, 10 years, 20 years ago, performing a search on Google like 20 years ago was something that, like, you know, not everyone was. The equivalent of Fiverr were having people that were saying, I will do Google queries for you, because you don't know how to perform them. And now everyone is able to do that. Like 10 years ago or 5 years ago, if you would have asked someone like, why do you think, in general, why would you think that you keep seeing these things on your social media rather than something else? They would have said, I have no idea. And now a large number of people can explain that, yeah, there's like about what I clicked and what I commented on, and they have an idea about that. When will we get to this like massive storage of data, querying and visualizing available to, you know, outside of expert areas?
I don't know. I actually was talking to my oldest son about that yesterday, strangely enough. Why can't we already do this querying? What I think is going to happen is I think you're going to find that people are going to be able to go to consoles and start asking questions, kind of like Google, but on their own data. And I think you're seeing people like Tableau start coming out with edges of their products where you can ask questions in a more natural way. You know, I always like to think back to that Star Trek computer where you could just say, hey, computer, tell me X, and the computer would do it. And frankly, when you put Alexa together with being able to build something like Tableau on top of something like Atlas Data Lake or Snowflake or something like that, I don't think we're more than probably 5 years away. I really don't, which is pretty interesting.
You know, any companies that are kind of like putting...
Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, go on.
I wanted to ask if you know any company that is trying to put those things together in the way that you just described.
I happen to be able to say that both Microsoft and Amazon have efforts in that area.
Right.
I know the people in those teams, and they're thinking the same way we are.
Got it. We have questions.
You gotta think Apple is too, but I don't know anything there. I mean, it's pretty clear that we want to be able to ask questions of data. How many times do you ask your Alexa or ask Siri a question and you get back some nonsensical response? All of those go into a bucket of unsuccessful responses. You know they're working on all that stuff.
Looking forward to that. A question from Bogdan. Do you believe that SQL will become obsolete in the near future? Is it still a good idea to invest time in designing relational databases for upcoming apps? Or one should start moving towards an NoSQL approach?
So this is a great question. In fact, you saw I tried to jump you and get to it. So thank you, Bogdan, for the question. I think we need to separate SQL from relational and SQL from document. There are various companies which allow you to use SQL or SQL-like queries to query your document databases. And I think that's just fine. In fact, SQL in some ways is a pretty awesome language. I don't think SQL is going to become obsolete anytime soon. In fact, I actually think you might see SQL and document query languages working together. SQL more for humans and document languages more for computers and for programmers. And so your next question was, you know, should we start designing relational databases? And this is more for you. If you're in an environment where you have relational databases, I mean, Postgres is a great database. I worked on it for 6 years. If you have relational databases and you have an app ecosystem that's used to using them, go ahead and use those relational databases. The places where you might want to think about document databases are where you're trying to iterate incredibly fast and where you actually don't know what your data schema is going to be like. And that's where you really want to make that balance. So while we at MongoDB believe that document databases can be used for almost anything, relational databases can be used for almost anything, and you just need to put the two together to figure out what's best for you. What we have found, though, and we have data to prove it, is that developers can develop faster and easier on document databases. And in fact, MongoDB, just a little bit of a plug for my company, has been the favorite database on Stack Overflow for 5 years running. And by the way, I'm not bragging about that. It's developers who voted, not us.
That's pretty good whenever it comes from the community using it. That's such a strong validation. If you guys and girls have any other questions, please let us know in the chat. I'll have on my side one final question for Mark. You were talking about how the type of data that we started collecting generated different types of, different ways of capturing it, and that led to a lot of not very clean data and so on. And we're looking at the type of data that we're collecting now, and we're so amazed that, hey, how come we're collecting this now and we haven't done in the past? But if we are to think of what would you think is the next massive data area or realm that we haven't really tapped into when it starts to like collecting it, storing it, and using it?
So everyone tells me it's IoT data, and I guess I struggle with that because I do think IoT data, sensors, and all that is really big. But the area that I think personally, and this is just my personal opinion without industry-wide insight, is I don't think we're doing enough with our logs. I actually think that when we look at our databases and how they're running, and we look at our apps and how they're running, we could actually write systems that work better. We could write systems that actually parse our data and work far, far better, and see our systems as they fall off the cliff performance-wise or fall off the cliff otherwise. And so I think it's that data which we're not parsing correctly.
All right. Seems that there are no other questions in the chat. Mark, thank you so much for joining the Q&A session. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us, and thanks for being part of Techsylvania.
Thanks, Adrian. It's great to see you. And thanks, everybody, for joining. And like I said, I am totally available on both Twitter and LinkedIn. And I love having technical talks with anybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks. And I would highly encourage everyone watching to take you up on that. I've had the pleasure of working with Mark before. He's a great leader. And me personally, I learned a lot. So I encourage you to kickstart the conversation with him. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark, again.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.